That was Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland just moments ago on this program. Nearly 2 months after the federal budget, a Liberal motion to increase Canada's capital gains inclusion rate has just passed in the House of Commons, despite the Conservative Party voting against the motion. The Liberals had kept the measure out of the main budget bill, forcing the opposition parties to take a position. The Tories are slamming the tax change, calling it a job killer, while the Liberals are accusing them of voting against tax fairness. Let's bring the issue to the front bench. We're going to talk about the political stakes. Joining me this evening, former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt. She's now the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is here. And together with us from Toronto, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's now the CEO of Space Canada. Next to him, the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Great to see you tonight. Lisa, I'll start with you. Do you think that this is going to do what the Liberals think it will politically for them?
No, not at all. I read the press release put out by the Leader of the Opposition, and I think they have already beaten the government in communications because they made a very good case, the opposition did, with respect to why this tax change is bad for the economy. And then they proposed what they would do instead. And what they would do is they would put it in the hands of ordinary Canadians, not lobbyists, clearly said in the press release, as to what a tax reform should look like, and we're going to put it back in the hands. So when the Deputy Prime Minister mentions the Carter Commission, the Leader of the Opposition is saying, well, we're going to have our own tax reform panel. We're going to look at it. We're going to do it in the first 60 days. That's how we're going to solve the problem. We're not going to go after the sectors of the economy that we need to be firing and putting a challenge in front of them by changing the capital gains tax at this moment.
What do you think of the way, Brian, the Conservatives framed it? And I will note, this came out in the budget. We were talking about it on budget night. The Conservatives did not take a position on it until today. They released a 15-minute video plus the statement that Lisa is referencing, and they ultimately decided to vote against it. That is what the Liberals hope would happen, right? They would like to use this as a wedge, despite what the Finance Minister said to my initial question in our interview. How do you think the opposition handled it, and do you think it'll do what the Liberals wanted to?
I think they handled it pretty smartly. I think if you look at this situation, it's one of those, and I'm guessing here, haven't seen any polling per se, but I'm guessing that's one of those that the policy measure would actually poll quite well with Canadians. I think it would be supported. You explain a sentence or two what the policy is trying to do, and I think a lot of people would say, yep, I agree. The challenge, though, is that once you get into sort of voting for it, either it gets washed out. So that's what the Liberals, I think, tried to do by taking it out of the budget and having its own sort of day in court, if you will. And the other problem that you could have is that if it gets into a larger narrative. So for the government, if it gets into a larger narrative, you could maybe get away from the fact that it is in isolation probably a policy that is supported. So I think the Tories came to that conclusion and they said, let's wait. Let's take the time we need to build our case. They put out the video. The video is quite well done, 15 minutes, and trying to give a narrative. And it's all about a narrative for 10 minutes of the video, and then they finally get to the policy. So I think they recognize, yeah, this is probably popular in isolation, but if we can sort of give context, give a narrative that we think it's not going to be the right policy at the right time, then that's the best way for us to then be opposed to it. And obviously the press release would come and sort of bolster that argument. So I'm not surprised to see that, and I think it was strategically done, and it made sense to do it that way.
Rob, what did you think about the way that this ended up going down?
It's one of these weird things, Vashi, where I think maybe the Liberals and the Conservatives both, it played out the way that they both wanted it to play out. And I think the proof's going to be in the pudding, though. Brian and I were talking off camera about June 24th, the by-election in St. Paul's. I was speaking to a doctor friend of mine who lives in that riding on the weekend, and this is that he traditionally votes Liberal. He's going to vote for the Conservatives, he says, because of this policy, and he's worried about what it will do for doctors who are as small business people in Canada. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, but there are probably more people who could be helped by it than are going to be hurt by it. And I think that's what the Liberals are probably banking on.
I think from a strategic perspective, I've been very curious, and maybe the by-election that Rob's referencing speaks to this in some way. There seems to be a decision strategically from the Liberals, Tom, to tack left, right? that there may be more votes to the left with something like this. That's who they're appealing for, to younger people who are worried about issues around fairness, and they think that they can, speak to that group of people. I think they lost some of the center ground with this. I know you're opposed to it. They've noted that, and you've spoken frequently on this show about it. But they appear to have placed less value on losing support from doctors or from small business or people who would generally tack more centered. Why do you think they're making that calculation? Do you think it's the right one?
Because they want to hold on to the NDP vote. They think that on the doorstep they can talk to people about the new social programs. That's exactly what Chrystia Freeland just did. What was she referencing? Well, the fact that a lot of women can go back to work because they've got a good childcare system. That is a very good childcare system that will help the economy. Other social programs they're going to be referencing. But it's not the 15-minute video in my experience, Vashi. It's the elevator speech. It's the 2 or 3 sentences. So what did we get today out of what Chrystia Freeland said? She calls it money to invest, fine, but it's $20 billion in new taxes. And what was the key message from the Conservatives? We're going to reduce taxes when we come in. We're not going to vote for a tax increase. We don't agree with the Liberals on this. So that's the main takeaway. I think that it's a bit of a push. With regard to young people, I think they might be a bit optimistic because young people, go with the definition of those that are between, let's say, 20 and 35. They're looking at boomers and they're saying, you guys had it easy. We're going to probably have far less chance than our parents or even our grandparents to ever own our own home. And it's because you've mucked things up. You haven't given any thought to planning things like housing. So Chrystia Freeland today, after 9 years, is saying, no, we've got this. We're going to start doing something about housing. But I think that the jury's already back on that one, and I think that Poilievre's won that fight. So it's a bit of a push. I think that the big trap the Liberals believed that they had set for the Conservatives on this, it's coming to very little. I don't think that the average person is saying, oh, good thing that Trudeau's there to finally go after the ultra-rich, because as we've learned all the way along, it's not necessarily just the ultra-rich who are being hit by this thing.
I think it's also, as I was listening to the minister, there are programs that they have decided on and done, like the Canada Child Benefit, like the daycare program, Lisa, that have had a material impact. The problem is there's a whole lot of other stuff that hasn't, and also people just don't feel better off. There's so many other things going on in the economy that it's not like people are sitting there going, who deserves credit for how great I feel? The government. So even if the narrative were to work, it feels like a hard time for it to.
It does, and I don't think that voters think about what have I been given. I think they'll be swayed by what are people going to take away from me. So that's where the Liberals will come at it from the Conservatives. They'll say, what are you going to take away from the voter? And the Conservatives came back and said, well, we're going to give you a tax cut and we're going to let ordinary Canadians figure that out. So I think that's interesting. I also do believe that the jelly is set on this one with respect to whether or not that Gen Z younger millennial group is going to give their vote to the Liberal government. They're not stupid. They know that this government's been around for a long time, and they may just want to see a change in general. It'll be, thank you very much for everything you've given me so far, but we really do want to change, and we don't quite frankly believe you anymore. I do think that no matter what this government does, it's going to be a hard slog to sell Mr. Trudeau at the doors for that generation.
You can really tell, though, Brian, and it was evident throughout the entire interview, the main thing that they are trying to do right now is create that contrast, to basically say, Pierre Poilievre will take it all away. We are prepared to do the opposite. The question is whether that resonates, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's tough to make that resonate. I think if you can have enough opportunities to repeat it, maybe you'll reach enough people for it to make a dent, but it is tough. And think about it, right? If you're trying to help, you're making the argument you're trying to help with generational fairness, you're trying to help younger generations, the capital gain tax policy is not going to tomorrow or at any moment send money to some young people that says, here's your share of the capital gains tax policy, right? So it's a hard argument because there's nothing kind of solid that comes with it that will be in people's minds and that they can sort of feel like it's having an impact on them. Does it have an impact? Sure. The arguments make sense to say that's where we get revenue, and then we're putting in programs to help on housing, for example, for daycare. And I think that's what the minister was trying to do a bit of in the interview. But it's hard to make those connections. And it's a policy that, again, would most likely sort of go unnoticed to those that probably will benefit from it from a macro point of view. But those that will feel that it's a negative for them, they're going to feel it, they're going to see it, and they're probably going to be pretty upset. So it's a tougher sell because of that, even if a lot of Canadians probably agree in theory with the policy.
Yeah, they're pretty upset, that's for sure. So those people who are impacted. I'll take a quick break. The front bench is sticking around. We're going to turn our attention to the issue of foreign interference, and in particular what you heard from Green Party co-leader Elizabeth May earlier on the program. After reading through that top secret redacted report, she says she's breathing a sigh of relief. We'll talk about that next.